I want to get to another kind of way of classifying intervals. We've seen size and quality and how they're used to measure the distances between these notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those are the sizes. Perfect, minor, and major, augmented and diminished, those are the qualities. But there's more to intervals than just that. And this is getting a little bit fuzzier, but I think it's really important to know about. So another way of classifying intervals is in terms of their consonance and their dissonance. And in music, these terms are a little bit, like I say, vague and fuzzy, but I think they are kind of important. So when it comes to our perfect intervals, those are going to be always consonant. Because consonance just means an interval with a clear, harmonious, which means they sound together. They sound good together. Harmonious sound. This aspect of sounding good together can change from culture to culture, and does, but is generally is in contrast to something called dissonance, which will be something less good, so that the consonance shines out by contrast as being more desirable, or something that we expect. Something that gives us a sense of home, for example. Say you wanted to end a piece of music, but you didn't want to leave someone at the edge of their seat or hanging. Well, in that case, you'll want to end on an interval that feels harmonious, that feels something that can be a finishing chord or note, and that those intervals in those moments of completion or of endingness are usually going to be relatively consonant, are usually going to be something that makes us feel like, we're settled down now. Whereas dissonance, its alternative, will keep us on the edge of our toes. What's going to happen next? The consonant intervals, like I said, include all the perfect intervals by default. Unisons and octaves are clearly clear and harmonious. Fourths and fifths, as we showed before, have a similar kind of clear and harmonious sound. And there's mathematical reasons for this that we could totally get into. But for now, I'm just concentrated on these basic building blocks in music theory. The other intervals that usually get roped into this sense of consonance are the thirds, both the major and minor third, and the sixths, the major and minor sixth. So all of those are considered relatively consonant compared to, for example, the seconds and the sevenths, which we'll call dissonant. And these dissonant intervals are intervals that have vague and crunchy sound that may be contrasted with consonants, as I said, as something undesirable. The dissonance is going to be like they rub against our ears, and they kind of make us desire to move forward to something more, to resolve to something more consonant. So a lot of times, as I'm moving through these intervals, you'll kind of feel a sense of satisfaction as I reach a consonant interval. If I start on a consonant interval, and then I go through the minor second and the major second, dissonance, to a slightly more consonant, maybe even more feeling consonant, to the perfect fourth, which is just clearly nice and harmonious. Same if I come down from the top to the fifth, as I did before. The seventh, dissonant. The minor seventh is also kind of dissonant, although a little bit more consonant than the major seventh. I don't know if you would agree, but this one's clearly crunchier or stranger. This one's nice. Now here we're in the realm of consonants. So from a dissonant to a consonant, a different consonance, and then to the fifth, which is almost as clear a consonance as you can get before you're back at the octave. So at any rate, consonance and dissonance is a cool way to categorize the intervals in your head, because it'll help you to think about when you're composing or when you're listening to music. You can think about how a composer or how an artist is using consonant and dissonant combinations of notes to create a sense of motion or a sense of purpose in the piece, to create moments of tension and moments of relaxation and all the kind of dynamic interactions that can happen in music. So I think getting used to this is going to, with some practice, is going to open the doors to a whole new realm of musical understanding. And I think consonance and dissonance are really at the heart of that. Now, don't take anyone too seriously if they say this is always consonant, this is always dissonant, because these are, of course, all relative. And I keep coming back to that. Notes in relation to each other. Like I said, consonance and dissonance could be defined as whatever. And some composers have said, this thing that sounds dissonant to you is actually consonant to me. And I'm going to show you that by having something even more crazy resolved to that and make that feel like a comfortable home place to end up on. And that happens. I think that's really kind of an interesting psychological phenomenon, that we can understand relative consonance and relative dissonance. But anyways, traditionally, these categories here, these intervals here fall into the categories consonance and dissonance. For example, I've put them at the top. For consonance, the unison, the minor third, the major third, the perfect fourth, the perfect fifth, the minor sixth, the major sixth, and the perfect octave. And on the bottom, the minor second, the major seconds, the augmented fourth and diminished fifth. Here's the minor second and the augmented fourth. Which one of those do you think is more dissonant? It's hard to say. That's dissonant. That's also dissonant. There we go. It's nice and consonant. So those are the differences. Those are the dissonances. As I said here, the augmented fourth and the diminished fifth is the tritone, and that is definitely one of the main dissonances. When I talk about the relativity of the consonance and dissonance relationship, or the way that they've changed in time and history and culture, so like even in Western classical music styles, it's really interesting to note that the perfect fourth has gone in and out of being classified as a consonance or a dissonance. So sometimes in history, this was a consonance, and sometimes it was a dissonance. So for example, take a look. The perfect fourth, to us, may sound pretty stable, pretty steady. But for a long time in music history, that was thought to be dissonant relative to the major third, which required a kind of resolution. In other words, for that top note to move down by half step to resolve into a major third. And you might actually recognize this sound. It's a pretty familiar sound. So this kind of old-fashioned sort of church cadence is an example of a fourth considered dissonant relative to its resolution point, the third, which feels more like an ending. So it totally depends on your culture, your history of listening, and everything that has entrained your ears to expect, okay, is that fourth good on its own, steady, stable, a good finishing point? Or is that going to need to resolve because it's dissonant relative to its neighbor, the major third? So that's up to you, or up to the style that you're composing in. These are the consonants and dissonances just laid out on the staff. So it's just another way of looking at what we just looked at. The same intervals here are labeled dissonant, but now you can just see them written out. So you see the seconds and sevenths there are in orange boxes indicating their dissonance, as well as the tritone in the middle.